Hey there, it's Barb Patterson. Welcome back to the Interverse of Business and Life. Today, I'm talking with Trevor Timbeck. He is a coach and an author and someone who brings a beautiful mix of heart, depth, and clarity to his work with others. If you've ever felt like you're trying too hard, overthinking, feeling stuck, chasing the goal without really feeling like you're getting anywhere, this one's for you. Trevor invites us into a different way of creating, one that is rooted in presence, play, and systems that support our aliveness and our creativity. We talk about being whole and how it's innate and not something we have to earn. And what does that have to do with business? We talk about dancing with the creative flow and potential of life in our work. We talk about honesty and being willing to be present to what is and how that can be a powerful gateway to new levels of performance. I think you're really going to love this conversation. I know I did. Throughout it, you're going to hear a lot of great gems that I think are really valuable and helpful to anyone in leadership, business, or life. So without further ado, let's get into it. And here's Trevor. Trevor, hello, hello, hello. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you came highly recommended. And then after, I got introduced to you via Steve Chandler. As I do with any of the guests, I start reading up and following and looking. And I read your book that you co-authored with Steve, which I know we'll get into at some point, The Power of Systems. But also I've just really loved a lot of your posts. Where I have found them is over on LinkedIn. And so I have some questions based on some of that we'll dive into for sure. But I really enjoyed our get to know each other conversation, and it made me even more excited for people to hear from you. So thank you for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So let's dive in. I'm curious, knowing that you're a coach and you work in the area of helping people shift consciousness and transform. When did you first realize that what's happening inside is impacting what we're experiencing or trying to do on the outside?
Yeah, I love that question. I would say the first crack that started to open was with my first coach. When he asked me, we were talking about, I forget what we were talking about, and he said, "What does your heart have to do with this?" And I laughed at him. And I said, "Nothing. It's all the brain, it's all the mind. Heart has nothing." After that, we had a session where I was crying, and he's like, "Your only assignment is not to stop crying until you're done crying." And I was at work sitting at my desk, and I said, "Okay, but can I close the door?" And he's like, "No, you can't close the door. Why? Is it embarrassing to cry at work?" And I'm like, "Well, I thought it was, but okay." And then we finished, and I was like crying for 20 minutes, and I didn't close the door. And I was like, "Okay, there's something here about my heart or something on the inside." So that was like the first crack that opened up the possibility that kind of got me excited about becoming a coach, exploring all sorts of things from Zen Buddhism to biology to the nervous system. And so that was like the first sort of crack. And then another pivotal moment was reading the book Radical Wholeness by Philip Shepard. And again, it was just still, I wasn't creating the connection, but something started to open up for me when he was talking about five senses. And he said, like in our culture, we call them the big five. We say there are five senses, and those are the only senses. But other cultures have up to, like some cultures have nine senses. And I was like, what? Nine senses? And then he said, even in our culture, we say sense of balance, but it's not one of the five. And for me, I was just like, back then I would have said mind blowing. Now I would say like something like ringing my bell or like something. I was like, oh my God. But how it occurred for me was I've been lied to my whole life. Why has everyone been lying to me, right? Which I learned that they weren't lying. It's just I started to see like, oh, that's the impact of culture. That's the impact of language. And then as I started to explore more of my own journey, I started to do programs and work with coaches and started to keep getting pointed back to, which at the beginning was very frustrating me when someone would say, well, it's on the inside. I'm like, what do you mean on the inside, right? So I think it took me a little longer because initially inside didn't resonate for me, right? And since then, I've develop my own way of speaking about it and sharing my experience, but definitely start to see that I create through my distinctions, through my languaging, through the way my nervous system is in this moment. And so it definitely occurs for me very different than how it used to when I said, the heart has nothing to do with it.
Well, I'm curious, what did opening that crack of the heart having something to do with it, what did that do for you, if anything, to start to realize, oh, the heart has a place? How would you articulate that? And what did it start to open up for you?
So back then it opened up just why I said crack of like a possibility that maybe there's something else than what I thought
Mm.
I knew. And then with Philip Shepard and some of the other things, there was a quote that I came across that I loved, originally attributed to Mark Twain. And the quote is something like, "It's not what we don't know that gets us into trouble. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so." And I love that quote because it turns out Mark Twain never said it or wrote it. So even that quote ain't so. But that's what I started to see. It's like, okay, so there's my whole life. What I talk about is I had a 40 years in a mastery of righteousness, of being right and being certain and having answers. And when I started to see that maybe I didn't know, maybe there was something else in the beginning, that just opened up my curiosity and ability to start reflect and start to learn. And then as I started going in and exploring for myself, it opened up other ways of knowing, right? Besides just the mind. So the heart, the nervous system, our language, what I would now say, a very systemic view, which is where the power of systems came from, of like seeing the impact on that. But in the beginning, it was just what I've learned since then is like anything we're certain about, we won't reflect on. Because why would I reflect if I'm certain, right? And so those first initial cracks were the loosening of my certainty.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so much richness in that, even that statement, and our willingness to be uncertain. Because you're right, when the mind draws a conclusion, it shuts down, it stops being open or exploring as much, right? So that the more comfortable we are with uncertainty, I think we naturally are available for more of those multitudes of experiences or senses or information can come through, right, in the intellect, but it can come through in a feeling, it can come through the body, it can come through a knowing. And that's
Mhm.
what I hear sort of opened up for you in your journey over those years.
Yeah, absolutely. There was I think part of the impact that Philip Shepard had was the book Radical Wholeness opened up to like my awareness of how much we have this allegiance to the head and to the mind, and that there are other ways of knowing, and other cultures don't have the same allegiance to the mind or to the head.
Yeah.
And that just got me curious about like, well, what are these other ways? What is the somatics and the body intelligence and the things that I've been
Yeah.
exploring more recently?
And how would you articulate the way that openness and awareness has informed your life or your work?
It's a great question. I think the biggest impact has been, like for me personally, and then in how it shows up in my work, is being much more present.
Mm.
Like noticing that that's where that other way of knowing shows up. So the mind loves its certainty and can go into the future and the past. And why I love the body, what I always say anyway, is the body is always present, right? The body never lies, although we can misinterpret it, right? And to me, it's been this practice, which I would then say now it might show up as trust. But in the beginning, it was just practice of like, well, if I am present, if I am in this now moment and connected to like that, I will have access to whatever I need to know if I need to know it in that moment, right? Or I can experience other ways of knowing, which to me, always coming through the body, require us to be, I was going to say require, but also invite us to be present in order to
Yeah.
know and experience them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that as part of your story, you've had a few pivots, but one was from being inside of an organization and then deciding to start your own business, coaching others. And I'm wondering, speak about that choice. Like, how did you know it was time? What was happening, internally that helped you make that shift? Because I think a lot of people throughout their career have those times when they can feel the stir of something new wanting to be experienced or lean into. So, can you share about that?
Yeah, I would say I was very lucky in that I was working with a brilliant coach, a different coach at this point, who helped me because I was still stuck in wanting to know and even wanting to prepare. And as you were pointing to, it's like there was something else that I would call like a longing or an intuition or another way of knowing that was calling me to something else. So I had done my coach training, my coach certification. I had done a lot of internal coaching. And I said to my coach, I think I'm getting close to being ready. And she just started to laugh. And I said, like, why are you laughing? And she said, well, let's use a metaphor. If this was a pregnancy and you were pregnant, how far along do you think you are? And I paused and I reflected and I started laughing. And I said, the baby's already come out and I just need to look and see if it's a boy or a girl, right? Like, but before she asked it that way, I probably would have said, I don't know, like 2 months into my 9-month pregnancy, I still have all this, which to me was the wanting to be certain and wanting to be able to control it and know how. And once I shifted, I got excited. And that was like the final sort of turning point of like, okay, I'm going to start my own practice. There's no more having to get ready or get prepared for it.
Yeah. And how has that leap and then the continuation of your business like showed you more of who you are? Can you share some examples of how, as a business owner, it's opened up more of your capacity or capabilities that were maybe already there, or maybe you developed them?
Yeah, to me, one of the reasons I love coaching, and I always tell people I have this unfair competitive advantage because I get paid to do this all day long, right?
Yeah.
To explore with my clients, but also for me to keep doing my own work, right? Doing things like Integrity Boot Camp or Body Intelligence with Katie Hendricks or
Yeah.
Landmark Forum or coaching with
Yeah.
amazing coaches. And currently I'm working with Steve Chandler. It's like all of that to me is really an investment in myself, which is then pays so many dividends in the work that I do with clients. And so I was very clear in the beginning. Part of the reason I was excited to leave corporate, because I was doing coaching and leadership development in corporate, but part of the reason I was so excited was to have all of this time to go do other things, right? And that would, to me, definitely help my coaching. But for me, it was kind of like, oh, I have so much I want to learn and explore and research. Could I have a job where I'm actually getting paid to do that?
Yeah, and you created that. Nice job. Nicely done. How do you balance coming back to the idea of kind of radical wholeness? And I'll just share, like the idea for me is that, we are whole and complete. And that often I know in my own journey of studying psychology, it was really, and doing a lot of the self-help programs like Forum and hundreds of others that I also love to be a student and learn. It was, to simplify it, kind of built on the premise that you weren't whole and complete. Like you had some work to do to get there. Now, thankfully, in my journey and teachers and mentors, that shifted to realizing, oh no, whole and complete to start. And we are this, again, coming back to where, we started, we're this multi-dimensional being, and so there can be blind spots. There can be edges of thought that look real and are just an illusion, like all of that. The learning, the continued learning can be really valuable. How do you balance that? I love to learn and I'm growing and there's things to see, and whole and complete.
Yeah, I love the question. So for me, it doesn't occur as a balance. What I love about wholeness is it includes everything, right? And so what really opened up my eyes to this is Alan Watts, and then lots of things since then, of seeing that of like yin and yang are not opposites, right? Or male and female are not opposites, right? They're complements. They go together. And so for me, I've just always had this, which I now can look back and see, this love affair with wholeness, right? So even my coaching program, I chose that program because I read something about it and they said, we believe everyone is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And I was like, I'm in. I don't know what the rest of it, but that resonated with me. And so what I love about wholeness is that it includes everything. There's nothing outside of wholeness. So for me, it doesn't really occur as balance. And I then get to explore how complements or contrasts, or even what maybe other people would call opposites, are creative. And so I am a big fan early on of Zen and a lot of the Zen sayings, right? And one of those would be like, everything is whole and complete and perfect, and there's room for improvement.
Yeah.
Right. So it's sometimes some things sound paradoxical, but to me, it's like when I go to that, zoom out to that context of wholeness, that's not paradoxical. That's really just play. That's what this universe is doing. 13.8 billion years of playing, which we can then say is growing, or some people will put evolution on there and say it's survival of the fittest or something else. To me, that's not my interpretation of it, because it brings in too much competition and something else into it, versus it really is playing or dancing, and learning and growing to me is just one way of playing and dancing.
Yeah. Is there a particular belief or idea you had about business and your own business that looked one way to you and now looks very different? What would you share about that?
Yeah, for sure. When I started my coaching business, I thought, okay, I need to make a certain amount of money. I need to work, I would sit at my kitchen table from 8 to 5. And I was very lucky in that I found Steve Chandler and the Prosperous Coach and his books and audios, and I did his school. And I still remember this conversation with Steve, is I had set a goal of like making $400,000 and doing all the rest. And I noticed I just wasn't excited about it, and I wasn't inspired. And so I shared that with Steve, and he said something like, well, then get rid of it. And I'm like, what do you mean get rid of it? Like, don't I have to have a goal? He's like, no, who said you have to have a goal? Right. And I was like, oh, and that was again another crack that started to open up. I was like, oh, what if, and why I use this metaphor of playing and dancing. It's like, well, what if my business wasn't to accomplish something? It wasn't to achieve something. It wasn't to get a result, or which to me is all out in the future.
Yeah.
What if it was just something where I was present and I was playing and dancing and having fun? And what I've started to learn is like, and that's when I am most powerful and I serve people the most powerful. And it seems to be correlated with making more money, which is great. But my journey has really been like, okay, so each year I make more money by putting in less time.
Yeah.
And that's the part I'm more interested in, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't
Sign me
want
up.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, struggle or hustle or do something else, right? To me, let's see, the last lever I ever want to pull is more time or effort.
Yeah.
And so that's been my sort of paradigm shift, right? It's like, okay, I want to create a successful business, and right. And, but to me, it wasn't because I needed to hit a goal or I needed to achieve something. I was like, could it just be coming from play and dancing and serving and seeing that that serves other people, and then yes, they're willing to pay for that, right? But not coming from, which to me, where I initially was coming from fear and lack. And if I don't make a certain amount of money, or if I don't make more every year, that means something bad or wrong.
So what do you mean when you say come from play? What does that mean to you?
It's really a commitment that I've made, and something I've given my word to, right? Of living a life of play and rest and power.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just a different paradigm, a different worldview that says, and comes from wholeness, right? Like if everything's whole and complete and I'm not lacking and there's enough of everything, then that question I sat with, which is to me the universe, right? It's like, well, then what would I do? What does the universe do? And it just occurs to me the universe is playing. I mean, you can use different metaphors, or the universe is dancing. This is that metaphor I got from Alan Watts, who said, I think, life isn't a competition or something else. It's a musical thing, or like a dance, and you're meant to dance or play along while the music is playing. Right. And to
Yeah.
me, that just one relaxed my nervous system. And it resonated of like, okay, and resonated with wholeness and completeness. And if there's enough, what would I do? And that's for me, my model is to look at the universe. It's like, the universe to me is the model of abundance. Otherwise, why would we have, I think now they're saying there's 200 billion galaxies with each with 100 billion stars. And I'm like, that to me is the model of abundance enough. Otherwise, the universe would be like, okay, let's stop after 50 billion galaxies. Do we need 200 billion? It's like, no, what's the universe doing? It's playing, it's dancing, it's exploring, it's learning, it's right. And it's like, okay, could I take that model that seems to work for the universe and apply it to my life?
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I mean, I think the idea that, we are nature, right? So that idea that dancing, I think of it, it's a language I often use too. It's like that there's this creative intelligence, this life force animating, the flowers, the birds, and me too, and you too. And so, how do we have a conscious awareness of that? I don't mean to, just to try and put language around that, and allow it to move us and dance with it, knowing that we're also in the world. So we
Hmm.
want to create businesses and clients and impact and love relationships and all of that. And so the more for me too, the more I've felt the dance of it, which by the way, really I can only feel in the present moment. Everything else is a potentially imagination, which is not a
Hmm.
bad thing, can be exciting and hopeful and
Yes.
creative and all of that. And it can be terrifying and, across the board. But I really love that. And I wonder too, it's like, you wrote an article, I can't remember exactly when, how long it's been, but the effortless wholeness is, am I remembering it right? And is that kind of what you're speaking into, is like play, dance is acknowledging the wholeness, the our nature, like our core essential nature, and then moving through life and work and goals and any of that with that awareness.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I use the word effortless not to mean that no effort is made, but that it
Yeah,
feels effortless. To me, that's the
yeah,
experience of being in the flow, right? When I'm in the flow, someone else may say, like, wow, you did a lot of work, you've put in a lot of effort. But for me, my experience was like no work. That was effortless. Something
yeah,
was just flowing. I love that metaphor as well, flow in water, right? It's like when I'm dancing, later I might notice if I'm kind of tired because I was physically exerting myself a lot. But while I'm dancing, it doesn't feel like effort.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think for me, what's been really helpful is realizing things like grit and determination and effort are just different states of mind. And depending on where I'm at, what's going on, the quality of my internal state, there's times I'm really grateful for the experience of grit because, like, it's helping me in a moment. But knowing it's not the source of doing well, it's not the source of creativity, of problem solving, of even what I'm creating. It's not the source of that, has been really helpful to just kind of ride those waves of experience, which then in a bigger way feels more effortless or more like, the surfer rides the waves and they're in the flow of riding the waves, but they're still waves. I think that's been another piece to be, to help me like sink into the dance more
Yeah.
and not
The metaphor
resist
that
it.
Yeah, the metaphor that comes up for me as you're sharing that is like the metaphor of seasons of like, well, there's a season for everything, and maybe there's a season for grit or
Yeah.
something else. But to me, if I zoom out, again, going back to the universe, it's like you might say, well, like spring is the season of hard work because everything's growing, right? But what I notice is year after year, spring doesn't try to come sooner, doesn't try to go faster, doesn't try to get more done, right? It's like, so ultimately to me, the context is play and dance, and there will be moments that an observer, so someone else looking, would say that's grit or you're putting in a lot of discipline or something else, right? But for me, if I'm present and in the flow, it just doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. Now, how would you describe flow? So I'm thinking of like, at times in my own business or people that I'm sure you and I, working with other business owners that or leaders that my mind can say this isn't flowing, like there ain't no flow, right? Because I feel like, starts and stops, or I'm efforting more, or things don't seem to be like getting the momentum I'd hope for, or, and I'm just curious if someone came to you, speaking for a friend, Trevor, right? So came to you and said, what is up? Does that mean I'm not in alignment? Does it mean I'm not listening? Or is it just like a season? Like how would you respond to that?
It's a great question. So I think there's the seasonality component to it, but also the level with which you're looking at it, right? So I'm a big fan of zooming out to the level of the universe, right? And wholeness. And it's like at the level of wholeness and the universe, everything is always flow.
Mm.
Everything, or drift is the other word I love to use. Everything is always flowing. Everything is always drifting. If I zoom in really small, it might look like resistance, which is usually what's going on when someone says they're not in flow. There's something they're resisting, including the lack of flow, right? But if you stop resisting the lack of flow or the stuckness or something else, I find you just kind of get right back into the flow and things become effortless again, right? So that's to me like sort of the shift move from resisting to accepting.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like I always want to point people to the body because I don't think acceptance happens in the head, right? Because they'll be like, yeah, I totally accept this, right? It's like, well, how do you know? And slow down because it's not something the head does. That's something we do in the body. And what I often find, even my experience of writing the most recent book, there was one chapter when I was just really stuck and couldn't come up with something. And once I have certain shift moves that I like to do, and one of them is go for a long walk. And when I went on my long walk, what came through me, what occurred, what sort of flowed to me was like, okay, I'm not accepting the stuckness. I'm not loving the stuckness. What if I accepted and loved the stuckness? And when I did that, all of a sudden, all these ideas started flowing, and I came home and finished the chapter and actually made that what the chapter's about.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think it, for anyone listening, if it feels a little like esoteric or you're having thoughts like, what does this have to do with anything? I need to create clients or business or solve this product problem, whatever that might be. I think that piece of realizing the moment we feel stuck or up against something, or to just look at in that moment, what am I resisting? And part of what we're resisting is the feeling potentially that's in that moment. Or as you said, like the mind is like, I've sort of coined the self-helper Barb, like God love her. She just wants to help me all the time. Right.
Yes.
Like, and just being playful, but it's like being stuck. Then my mind is like, oh yeah. Okay. What do we do about stuck? Or things aren't flowing. Okay, well, what's going on? Let's diagnose. Let's
Mm-hmm.
diagnose you for sure, and then
Yes.
diagnose the situation, right? Like it just, and what feels sometimes really radical or can feel like not a good use of time, but ultimately, like you, I've seen the power in it is to go, okay, what is right here? And to just allow it, to allow the stuck or to allow, I was doing a retreat, a one-on-one with retreat with somebody. And during it, they asked me a question and I said, oh, I'm just kind of feeling numb. Now, this part of me that is into self-improvement and like a go-getter was like, all right, let's bust through that, like, all right, get
Yes.
through the numbness to the real feeling. And then she was like, okay, we'll hang out with numb. And it was
Mm.
just like, it just made me laugh because I could just see that conditioning in me that like, no, we got to get somewhere. What's the value here? And yet you're right. As soon as we stop that inner resistance to whatever, things open up. And then that's to your example. You got creative ideas. That's helpful for the business. Or for me in that moment, what happened was I dropped into a new level of understanding about a situation. But if I had been trying to use my mind to break through the numbness, that wouldn't have happened, So
Mm.
I think when people are thinking, what does this have to do with my need to create a thriving business or to work a product problem out, to play with it and experiment and just see like how powerful that orientation can be. Would you add anything to that, Trevor?
No, I think that's it. I think the beginning is it starts with the awareness, right? Of like, oh, I am resisting or I'm stuck, or I love the model the conscious leadership group uses above the line or below the line. It's like, oh, I'm below the line. I'm in fear. I feel like I'm at the effect of the world and something outside of me is causing the stuckness,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, okay, once I realize that's just what's going on and that's totally normal and natural and we're always going above and below the line and we're in fear and out of fear, I don't need to fix that. Like you said, although a persona may come up to self-help improvement or something else, and it will say, well, let's go fix that. To me, once I have the awareness, I take everything, all those thoughts with a large grain of salt of like, oh, that's just how it looks from in fear, right? Or in this reactive triggered state. Of course, it looks like the answer is problem solve, do more, which is usually actually what's created the stuckness, right? It's been that striving or doing this same
Right.
repeated loop or whatever I'm in. And so the answer isn't do more of that or do it faster or do it better, right?
Yeah.
Often for me, my first step is slow down. Okay, slow down, breathe, move, love. That's three words that I got from Katie Hendricks: breathe, move, love. It's like, okay, what if I breathe? And then anything that involves breathing, right? What if I move? I just go for a walk. And then the love is like, sometimes I see it as do something I love, or also, what am I not loving about this? And that's how it occurred for me. I'm like, I am not loving the stuckness in this moment. Okay, because the mind had said the stuckness is bad and wrong and you shouldn't have stuckness, and okay, therefore let's get rid of it. And it's like, actually, that whole thing is what's creating this in the first place.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And it makes me think of coming to the book that, your most recent book. I know you're working on another one that's coming out shortly, but The Power of Systems, you know, um, the kind of bottom line premise being that systems over psychology. And, that I shared with you in our introductory call that just it's kind of one of those titles that, like, the title alone does something for you. It was like, and that I just really saw as somebody that has been in the personal development, organizational and leadership development, talent, all that, looking at how do we bring our best self to whatever we're up to has been like a personal mission of mine. And I can see like that for years, I kind of mentioned it before, it looked like the only way to change was to change your psychology, to change your thinking about the past, to change
Mm-hmm.
your mind, to change, like there was a lot of doing and a lot of faultiness in that. And then to shift that and really be like, oh, wait, what if your psychology isn't the thing that needs to be addressed? And you speak about it as systems. So I'd love to just kind of move in that direction a little bit, Trevor, but also for you, what was the moment that you saw that distinction for yourself? And what was the diagnosis you thought maybe? And then what was the system that ended up actually being the place of freedom? And feel free to obviously articulate more about that distinction. I know I've shared my perception initially.
Yeah, no, I love it. So it was kind of a combination of things. One, it was me exploring all of Steve Chandler's work and reading all of his books and listening to his audios. And then I was also exploring the work of Humberto Maturana and Gregory Bateson and some other people who play more in that systems world. But I noticed Steve used the word system a lot, right? Even his school was called the Advanced Client Systems, right? And so as I was exploring, I started, and to me, again, it was one of those things of like, that's not something I invented, but something kind of came through me one day. I had my own experience where I realized when I'm in fear, and I didn't use these words back then, but I just noticed that sometimes my thinking wasn't very good, right? And what I would say now is like when I'm in fear, when I'm below the line, when I drop out of presence, my thinking at the time, I called it psychology. My psychology was not very useful. It wasn't helping me. It was telling me to do things that were creating the problem, or it was telling scary stories that were scaring me more. And so I was just exploring of like, well, what would I do in that moment? Because most of my life I had relied on my thinking in my mind and been rewarded for having the right answers and being a clear thinker. And so initially I thought answer is never have bad thinking. Control your thinking. I went down that and I was like, that wasn't working. And it just sort of hit me one day in a bit of a flash in the terms of this distinction that at the time was systems, not psychology. I'm like, in that moment, I want to go with my systems, including my word, like what I said I would do, or, knowing what works for me, which is like now, and I started to test it. And I had one day where I got an email. Back then, I probably would have said the email upset me. Now I would say I upset myself with the email, right? Because I had a story about it. I got very upset and frustrated. I really wanted to send a nasty email back, right? And instead, what I did was I laid on the floor. And I don't know where this came to me, but it was just something said like lay on the floor. And I'm like, okay. So I laid on the floor, and that was just calming my breathing down. And I was looking at the ceiling. And all of a sudden, I heard this thud on the front step. And I was like, that's interesting. Probably an Amazon package. So I got up, I opened the door, looked, and there it was. It was a book from Steve, right? And so Steve sends me a lot of books, which I love. And it was the book, and it's on my shelf, Emerson and Thoreau, Nature and Walking.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Like, here's this book on nature and walking. And I started reading about walking. And then all of a sudden I just started laughing. I'm like, why am I reading about walking when I could go for a walk? So I put the book down and I went for a walk. And by the time I came back, my thinking about the email, and I was really sure it was the other person's fault. And all of a sudden I could see how I was responsible and how I had helped play a role. And what I wanted to say to them was like night and day. And I'm like, how did that happen? I wasn't trying to change my thinking. And that was when I first clued into like, for at least for me, the power of going for a long, slow walk and getting out in nature. And I sent Stephen a note and I'm like, wow, you were an amazing coach. Like, how did you time it that nature and walking would land on my doorstep? It's funny, he didn't, right? But it was like, okay, so could I have systems in place so that when at the time my psychology or my thinking, or really it's now I've seen it as my nervous system, goes into sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, right? Which physiologically turns off a lot of our brain. So that is not the time I want to go to the brain or the mind or my thinking and ask it what to do. And so that was how it initially started. And I shared it with Steve, and he loved the distinction, and he coined systems, not psychology, as SNP, and we pronounced it snap. And we would say snap out of it to each other, right? When you were stuck in something, like snap out of it, right? And we're like, snap out of it. What does that mean? Snap out of your mind, your thinking, the psychology in that moment, or your nervous system that's got you below the line and scared. Go with a system, right? Whatever works for you, or in this case, what you said you would do. And then as that shifts and you come back above the line, or I come back out of fear and into love, or into openness and curiosity, then I can go back to, what are the thoughts? But the thoughts would be so different and feel so different. And that's what I just noticed from that walk, like how the thoughts felt at the beginning towards the end, but also how much more possibility I saw, how much more I was now excited to send the email versus before I wanted to send the email, but not because I was excited to send it, but because I wanted to tell the other person they were wrong and they were causing something and they needed to fix it. So it was just multiple moments of that with my own life. And then as Steve and I just started sharing with clients and expressing it this way, we just noticed how quickly people could make that shift from psychology to systems, or sometimes what I say, from ego to ecology, of seeing that what I love about systems is everything is interconnected, and I can play with something in one area that will have an impact somewhere else that I may not be able to predict. But all of a sudden, it opened up for me, and I think this is one of the big side effects of what I call 100% responsibility. That I could choose to be responsible, not blame or fault or shame or anything with it, but it's like I could do something where before I thought there was nothing I could do about it. And that's what I love about systems, is that they're all interconnected, and I can start anywhere, and I can play with something over here, or I can change something and I know it will change the system. And when we just started playing that game with people, and they started talking about themselves and the world differently, they got empowered, they got excited. And usually what would fall out of it is the ego or self, or having to change myself or fix myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there, in all the people you've worked with, I'm wondering if there's like a common one that you could speak to, that people often will, have a habit of maybe looking to psychology, but when they went to the system, it was more effective or helpful.
Yeah, a very common one. And I just had a conversation last week with somebody. They'll say, I don't have the confidence do it. Or they'll say, I don't have the self-esteem, or something of like, there's some characteristic I don't have. And we can put any other one, but a very common one is I don't have the confidence. And when I tell people, which is usually how I'll say it, is like, no confidence is required. One, they get excited about like, what? I don't need confidence? You and I don't have to go find this confidence or fix myself, right? And to me, that's the initial shift out of one interpretation. If we're in the mind or psychology interpretation, we'll say, I don't have confidence. If we go into the systems interpretation, it's very clear, no confidence is required, but perhaps they're not taking an action, or they don't have an experiment that they've run, or they haven't just started, or they haven't. It's like, as soon as I shift that person, in this case, they didn't have the confidence to go start a coaching business, and I said, not required, they started to see they were doing a whole bunch of things that were already moving in that direction. And what they needed to do was practice or run some more experiments, right? And all of a sudden they got excited and they were empowered, and they didn't need to go find any confidence. And someone else might look at that and say, oh, all of a sudden they had confidence now, right? Yeah. But to me, that's just one interpretation, which I just never found very powerful, because it actually started with me. Was I would read all these things and people would talk about change your mindset. It sounds so fascinating. It's like change. But I just thought one day, it's like, if that's what it was, well, why don't we all just change our mindsets to whatever, happy, and be done?
Yeah.
And as I started to look, I'm like, I don't know how to change my mindset. I don't know how to change anybody else's mindset. So what do I know how to change? And the biggest one I first saw was, I know how to change my language. And to me, this is what really one way I say about the systems is just a different language game, right? Instead of using words like mindset and confidence, and if I took all those words away from you, how else would you talk about it? And what I started to see is people would talk about systems or things they're doing or things they're not doing, but it just made it very simple, and they could see a path forward that they couldn't see before when they were trying to go. And I think this kind of relates back to what I said earlier of why I struggled in the beginning when people said it's inside you. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, where do I find it inside myself? And now inside me doesn't mean that, right? But I was like, do I have to go into my mindset? Do I have to find confidence? Where's this self-esteem? Where's this? It kind of just came from my own struggles. It's like, I could never find that. And if I started to change my language, all of a sudden something else was available without finding confidence or having to change my mindset. And so that's what I will often say to clients when they're working on something, and I'll say, you're like 3 inches from mastery on this, which they get excited. Like, what? I'm really close to mastery and only 3 inches? What are the 3 inches? And I say, it's the 3 inches from your mind to your mouth, right? Instead of changing your mind, if we start to change what you're saying about it and how you're talking about it, and then also what you're doing, since we always say actions speak louder than words, right? It's like something just instantly shifts in them, and then they're back into the flow. They start taking actions, they start learning, even if they're making mistakes, they can learn from the mistakes. It's like, that was just my own personal experience, and then what I've seen as I've played this game with other people.
Yeah, I can really appreciate that. And I'm curious, one of the things I've seen is, and for myself, this idea that in a way, the less of me on my mind, the more I'm able to dance with the flow and creativity and move. Right. But when I get on my mind too much, it can show up as like, you know, sort of this vigilance around, am I doing it right? How could I maximize this? What else should I be doing? Or you're so hyper aware of your feelings that then it becomes distracting, like lack of confidence or confidence. So I'm just curious what you would say around this idea, like just how amazing we do when we have less of ourselves on our mind.
Yeah. So sometimes how I talk about the book or that shift is from ego to ecology, or from self as a problem to system as a pattern. And it relates back to what you said earlier when you said, like, how do you distinguish flow? There's lots of ways, and the usual ways of like time passes quickly and effortless. One of the things I noticed is that in the state of flow, there's one thing missing, and it's me. There's no me there. There's no ego, right? And then when I fall out of flow, me shows up, and me says like, what's wrong with me? Or I need to, and it's like, oh, that's just so fascinating. This highly sought after, vaunted state called flow has no me. That's interesting. And it's like, okay, and this other place when it's all about me and self-improvement and where's my confidence and how, I'm like, that's just a lot of me and a lot of self and a lot of ego and a lot. And it's like, okay, that's just interesting to notice. And so for me, the power of systems incorporated a lot of what other people might call spirituality or non-duality or other things. But to me, it just gave me this very simple language I could use with anybody, including a CEO, that has the same, I won't say the same, similar impact to talking about no self or taking the ego out of it or not focusing on me so much. Or, I love the Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, right? And one of them is don't take things personally, right? And everyone loves that concept, but they're like, how do I do that? Right. And to me, the power of systems kind of has the same impact without them working on it or thinking about, which brings the me back in of like, how do I not take things personally? And all of a sudden they've made it personal about not taking things personally. So it had the same impact, but played the game differently.
And just for, like, let's say the issue is, okay, I'm taking what's happening here really personally, and that's showing up by I'm wondering what's wrong with me or, what I need to do different. That's an example of taking it personally. So, what would the system of that be? Like, where's what would you do in those moments leaning more towards system versus psychology?
Yeah. So again, depends on that situation of like what
Sure.
else is going on. But usually what we say to people is the first step is what's your current system that's creating this result? No doubt you're a part of it. But what I love about systems is there's a lot more going on than you, right? So let's just concede that you're missing confidence. Okay, wonderful. But there's still a lot more going on that's creating this result, right? And it's that the Deming quote of you currently have the perfect system for these results. How do I know? Because you're getting these results. It's just for me, and what I noticed with clients, I was blind to the system, the larger systems, what else was going on, right? And so when I ask people, like, well, what system is creating that? Right now, they're saying my lack of confidence. Okay, sure, maybe that's a part. I don't think it's a part at all, but I'll concede it in the beginning. What else is creating that? And then they'll start to see it's like, well, it's this or that or this. And it's like, okay, so that system is creating this result. If you want a different result, all you have to do is change the system. And you don't need to know how. You could find it by accident. Like most breakthroughs of penicillin and all the rest were accidental playing with systems. And that's why I love systems of like the metaphor people often use or the example of like, a butterfly flaps its wings in Japan and a hurricane happens on the East Coast of the United States. Like, yeah, that's how systems work. Not always in hurricanes, but things are interconnected and it's systemic, and a small change over here can have a big change over there. And when I get people looking about, and really I get them talking about it that way, then they'll see the world differently. And then they'll be like, well, what if I just did this? Or maybe I could run that experiment or what? It's like, okay, great. I don't know if it'll work, but we can test it.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious, I asked Steve this. I'd love to ask you the same question. If there was one system that you could put in practice for everyone, what would that system be?
Everyone. Okay. So I'm like, okay, do I give how it really occurs for me, which I think is going to occur as a cop out. Um, the reason I say that is because what I love about systems is also that we are structure determined systems, which means my structure determines what happens, not something outside of me,
Yeah.
which means to me it occurs there's no universal system I could give that would work for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
The closest I could get
Yeah.
would be having people, again, I'm not going to say this is the truth and you'll see why in a second, but that if they started to use this system, which is the system I learned from Humberto Maturana, which is the view that there's no objective, universal, independent reality, right? And so why I say if we all started to use that system is we would be much more open to other people having different views or different ideas about something. If I don't think I have access to the truth, a lot of bad things and wars and all the rest of it happen based on I have the truth and that person does not have the truth. So if I could have that system of language, which is a more of a worldview, it doesn't guarantee anything, but to me, it opens up a space for a world that works for everyone, of like people to be able to get along and have space for someone else to hold an exact opposite opinion without having to get rid of them or destroy them or have them change their opinion because they think they have the truth and they can't stand the fact that someone else is
Yeah.
mistaken or doesn't see the truth, right? So that whole concept for me of truth or reality or objectivity actually gets in the way.
Yeah, well, that makes me think of where we started, right? When you shared that, you were pretty certain that you were certain about everything, that you were right about everything, or being right about something really mattered. And, really what you're saying now is if people, all of us could hold loosely, knowing that, there's multiple versions of possibility and potential and understanding and realities and be less sure about the way we see it, then it creates a natural openness. And it's where connection and understanding come from. I think that's beautiful. And I've really loved this conversation. I know we're coming towards the end, but I have a couple other questions I'd love to ask. And the first one is just, is there anything in your journey right now, your own personal journey, that is surprising you?
Yeah, I think recently I've been practicing much more. So this is a system I've been practicing much more awareness of where I am in each moment. Right. And so I even have my phone, it randomly asks me throughout the day, where are you? Right. And I don't mean geographically. I mean to what you and I pointed to of like, am I above the line or below the line? Am I in fear? Right. Am I relating to things like they are the cause, or am I relating like I am responsible and I can choose? And that when I first started to practice this system, like 80+% of the time, I was below the line. I was in fear. And that was shocking to me. And even when I shared it with Steve, it was shocking to him because I had this view of like, well, I'm at least a little bit more evolved, right? Like I must be. And it was like, no, this is to me something Gay and Katie Hendricks say all the time of like, most of us are not here and we're not here enough to know we're not here.
Yeah.
And so that was a big eye opening of like, yeah, a lot of the times I'm not here now. I'm somewhere else. For me, it was mostly in the future and I'm in fear, even if it's just like low level background kind of fear. But I was like, wow, that was really eye opening to me. And then with that awareness, I could start to practice other systems, including shifts and embodiment work and breath and other things that have just really helped me. But that's been something that I was initially dismayed by and now I'm very excited about, right? Of like, okay, that's always been going on. I just wasn't aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that invitation for all of us. And I think again, that distinction of, like you said for yourself, when I became aware of how much I was oriented to my mind versus here, like
Mm.
just receptive, open, present to what is, it was a little humbling, but in all the best ways,
Yes.
and that's a journey. There's no destination there. It's an ongoing journey, but so grateful for the distinction and the felt distinction
Yeah.
inside myself. And then just finally, Trevor, what's alive for you right now? Now, what are you feeling most alive about these days?
So I'm smiling because it may seem meta, but I love meta. Is like what's really alive for me these days is aliveness. I'm in love with aliveness. And it started, I don't know, 10 months ago in this phase. But when I was doing Integrity Boot Camp with Jim Dethmer of the Conscious Leadership Group, and he asked this question, which like stopped my mind, so to speak, in that moment, he said, what are you willing to risk for your aliveness? And I just loved that question. I've been meditating on that question and reflecting and exploring. But I had this at the time, this real breakthrough. In the beginning, I had a whole list of like what I was not willing to risk and what I was willing to risk. And what became so clear to me, at least, was that when I got down to it, I was like, the only thing I would need to risk or that feels at risk is really feeling my feelings all the way through. Like I had a whole bunch of stories of like, well, I wouldn't want to risk my family. I wouldn't want to risk. And it's like, again, it's not like I prefer to risk those things, but if something happened, because it's not in my control anyway, if something happened to my family or I lost all my money or whatever it was, it's like when I slowed down, what I was really starting to see is like what I'm really afraid of is like how I might feel. Yeah, like something would happen if I lost all my money or something. It's like, well, I would have to figure it out. But okay, I would do that. And so to me, that was just such a big insight and invitation of like, okay, I can just practice that. Like, because every time I have slowed down to feel my feelings all the way through, I find out there's nothing actually scary there, and they will shift. And there's so much intelligence in my feelings and other ways of knowing. And so I've just been really exploring aliveness. And a question I got from Katie Hendricks, which was like, how can I grow a nervous system that can handle ever increasing amounts of joy and aliveness and presence? And I don't just mean positive emotions, right? I mean the whole spectrum of emotions. And that was just a new question for me, because most of my life I've been like, I think I stood up at my wedding. I don't think I did stand up at my wedding and say, like, most people do this up and down, using up and down motion with my hand. I do this, like straight line, flat across. And back then I was very proud of this, but this is also like what happens when you die, right? Like the heart rate just goes deep across the thing. It's like, so nowadays what's much more alive for me is the whole concept of aliveness and living that full breadth.
Yeah, I probably no surprise, but that just speaks really deeply to me too. It's like I realized and, have said before, but that all this knowing of our wholeness and completeness and, that our humanness is a part of that equation. It's not that I've gotten better at having more good experiences. It's that I've gotten better at the full range of the
Yes.
human experience. And that is where the aliveness is for me too. And so much joy and gratitude and appreciation. And, I'm so grateful to you, Trevor, for sharing your personal journey and your insights, your wisdom, and all these amazing pointers you gave us today in the conversation and invitation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful for the invitation and my experience of this conversation, which was a lot of aliveness.
As always, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean a lot to us if you could take a moment to first subscribe and follow wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Hitting the follow button means you'll never miss a show. All you have to do is hit the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner or click on follow. While you're there, if you like what you're hearing, we'd appreciate you taking a moment to give us a shout out and review. Most importantly, however, if you know anyone that would benefit from this episode, please pass it along. And finally, if you'd like to learn more about my work, Interverse Academy, or upcoming events, you can check out my website at barbarapatterson.com. You'll find some great resources, classes, and videos, and a lot more. Thank you again for being here. See you next time.